Salutations from space and aloha from Earth, friends. This is Gemini Brett calling in from Richmond, California. It's a raining ash, and just want to open my heart for beings who are on the run from flames or floods right now, or trapped in home and not allowed to move about at all. I mean, it is such a powerful time that we're living in. It does feel quite apocalyptic, doesn't it? Um, and, there's something about the unveiling that's going down. So, serious times. It's really a pleasure to be back here at EA Zoom meetings once again. It's great to see how long Linda and team have had this dream happening, right? I mean, just so much astrological information coming through this channel, and it really is an honor to be invited to share, and an honor to be received. And I'll look forward to later going through the comments, whether on Facebook or YouTube or whatever it may be, and hopefully being able to respond to any of those. If you know the way I like to rock a slideshow, there tends to be a lot of slides and animations, and that it's not going to be like that today. Our last one for EA Zoom meetings was a whole lot of that, right? And I'll encourage you, if you didn't see that movie, which is called Turning of the Ages, to check it out at some point here. It basically reflects upon how I feel that the June solstice solar eclipse of 2020 is like the most powerful astronomical and therefore astrological gateway of our lifetimes. And we're in it, right? It's like not over. These windows stay open. These are portals. And then I usually follow that one up with, actually, there was one that was stronger, and that was 19 years ago, June solstice 2001, a total solar eclipse in the sacred hoop on the hand of the High One, Time Man. And so check out that video if you'd like. You can get to it easily at my website also, which is geminibrett.com. The offerings page, you'll find a whole bunch of videos from previous teachings, many of them here at this EA Zoom meetings platform. So it's often a place where I get to workshop some of the things that I've been working on. And today we'll do that again. So the conversation here is about the use of astrolocality maps for mundane or geopolitical astrology. I think in astrology, we arrive to fully dismantle the very idea of coincidence, at least the way that it was presented to us, right? These strange synchronicities happening, think nothing about that. There's nothing to it, right? But we're actually here to also reclaim the true essence of that word coincidence, right? Synchronized events. And as we know, the great rhythms of the heavenly happenings, every planet has its own beat, yeah? And there are cycles of time in which these great polyrhythms meet. One of those is a 19-year phenomena that astrology and astronomers today tend to refer to as the Metonic Cycle. Though that name, which is named for a Greek astronomer, is kind of ironic because much older calendars than the time in which the Greek astronomer Meton lived, like the Babylonian calendar, which has survived as the Hebrew calendar, or the Chinese lunisolar calendar, they are very much tuned to this 19-year periodicity. So let me show you an example of that. Today is where I sit, September 10th, 2020. and we're being broadcasted, I imagine, from Australia, where it is September 11th. So the 19th anniversary of maybe the most powerful global initiation that we will ever live through. I mean, folks who have been around longer than I have some other events that I think can compete. But one thing we can all say for sure is that there is no doubt that in September of 2001, an event occurred that completely changed everything. And I think in this year of 2020, we're really seeing some of that come to bear. And not really a pretty picture. Yeah. So a great question is, what do we do about it, right? Like, how do we make it through this thing? But, you know, you'll find that I'm a little careful with my words today, because one of the results of that time has been significant censorship, which itself is now a keyword, right? So we might find that this video lasts only so long on the platforms where it will be posted. Hopefully that's not the truth. But typically when I talk about this event in September of that time 19 years ago, the video, whether it be on YouTube or Facebook or wherever, at least is covered in a large disclaimer, which will send you to the accepted story. We should be very, very afraid of this now, right? I mean, I live in a land where the programming suggests free speech is the way, and written into the, Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Like, that ain't happening anymore, friends. A lot of channels that I follow have been just completely eradicated from the web, and you may know that many of the social platforms have announced that beginning this October, there are going to be some significant changes, right? To protect us from fake news. So to me, this is a very terrifying thing. And I'm not going to go so far into like alternative story or something like that, but we are going to check out this event that I've called here the Tower. And we're going to have a look at this event on an astrocartography map using the techniques of astrocartography. And we could also just say, more generally speaking, an astro map, because we will also look at this wonderful technique called local space astrology. And maybe we could take that a little further, but I don't think it's what we'll do today. And we won't only look at this moment, but maybe one in more recent time. So let me show you what I was speaking about in regards to the Metonic Cycle, the 19-year cycle, and the coming together of great rhythms. It's a wonderful thing to know, especially if you're on the verge of turning 19 or 38 or 57 or 76 or 95. These are all 19-year multiples. Because if you are, you will find something similar to this. Like if we look at a solar return chart coming up, let's see if we got the year. We did. Okay, so notice that for this event, the Tower, on this date in 2001, here we are 19 years later in 2020, and notice that during the solar return, we find a lunar return. And this is a really strong one here within a degree, right? Right at the galactic edge, opposite galactic center, this place in the sky. And I spoke a lot in the last EA Zoom meetings, the turning of the ages, the hand on the, or the sun on the cross, about this place of space, about the power of this place of space. But anyway, just tune into the truth that when we look at all these amazing transits that are happening and all the things that we do, this is a 19-year rhythm. We have a lunar return by degree every 27.3 days on average. We have a lunar return by phase every 29.5 days on average. And they coincide, they happen simultaneously, which implies a lunar return degree during a solar return, so phase, every 19 years. They don't always look this perfect. Sometimes you have to move it a day or before or after your actual solar return event, or the solar return of an event, as we're looking at now. But it's a very powerful thing. And what does it mean? Well, it really depends upon what you feel the moon and the sun are, and I'll include Earth in that mix. I want to show you another piece of this thing. So looking at that solar return of 2019, let me bring this to now. So here's the 2019 solar return, and of course this doesn't have to be on the same calendar date. In this case, actually we'll find September 10th at 11:09 p.m., which is coming around in about 3 hours. A little bit less, 2.5 hours from now. Well, let me show you the year after that, 20th year, and this will be true for most of us. And it brings about what's called a Mercury Cyanotic return. So notice that in the solar return chart for this event in the year of 2021, 20 years after the event itself, Mercury returns during the solar return. And of course, we find a lot of interesting images here, like Saturn in Aquarius conjoining where Neptune was at the time with Jupiter, where Uranus was, Neptune at Lilith, etc. Easy to see the strength of those conjunctions. But again, I'll direct your attention here because this is one of the powerful things of the 20. You may know that Venus cycles align every 16 years, right? So if we go back here to 2017, 16 years after the event, you see the strength of Venus return during the solar return. And this would be a wonderful topic in and of itself, of course, the planetary cyanotic returns, which is the coincidence or the synchronization of planetary rhythms, right? So the rhythm of the year, the Earth-Sun relationship, coincides with the rhythm of Venus-Sun, from Earth's point of view, every 8 Earth years. With Mars, this happens for the first time at 15 years old, and you'll see the coincidence of Mars return during the solar return. That doesn't look as tight, does it, as the Venus alignment? No, Venus is very harmonic. Earth and Venus's orbits about the sun are very circular. That's certainly not the case for Mars. A little bit more chaotic, that one. And of course, this was one of the most chaotic times ever. So just to finish that flow, I guess, let me bring in that second chart and we will look at this year to come once again, which is tonight where I sit, a lunar return during a solar return. And then next year, a Mercury return during a solar return. And check out your 20th solar return chart. You're likely to see that, okay? So with Venus, if you're not born with Venus on or near Venus retrograde, you will find that every 8 years, 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, etc., you have a Venus return during a solar return. This is called a Venus cyanotic return, a Venus phase return, okay? Mercury does this every 6 and 7 years, or every 7 and 6 years alternating. So whether you add 6 plus 7 plus 6, actually that gets you to 19. 7 plus 6 plus 7 is 20 years. And we find that this event, the tower, is on that periodicity because it's a 20-year solar return that also shows us a Mercury return. And that means to me, I can just see right away that if I cast a chart for this being, if you will, when they were 7 years of age, this would have happened then. At 13 years of age, this would have happened then. And at 20 years of age, in other words, next year, this again. Whereas it's 19 years where we find, again, lunar return during solar return. And for me, and you can find actually another EA Zoom meeting I presented some time ago, called Circle, Crescent, and Cross. You can find that at GeminiBrett.com as well in the offerings page. I share some of my cosmology around just what the sun, just what the moon, just what the earth are and where to find earth in the chart. And for me, that's leaning towards the ascendant, what's on the rise. I like to say what's rising when you rose is rising within you, and love to share the truth that the eastern sky only rises because earth is falling in that direction. And usually follow that one with this. Just as we descend into matter to lift the heavens up. So regardless of which of these great cosmic kung fus, these great astrological paradigms you are most attracted to, undoubtedly one thing that they all seem to agree upon is that planets at the astrological angles, the ascendant, the midheaven, the descendant, the Imam Cheli, the IC, the bottom of the heavens. Planets at the angles that I prefer to call the rise, the reach, the rest, and the roots, because that's what these angles do. Planets at the angles have strength. In the classical teachings of our craft, it's said that the first house is strongest, and then the 10th, and then the 7th, and then the 4th, because those are the angles as the heavens move through our sky. Sun rises at the ascendant and then climbs to the midheaven and then sets in the west at the descendant and then finds its midnight at the bottom of the heavens at the IC, where it begins its daily climb. So we see some angularity on this chart. Now, very few astrologers, maybe only one, actually saw something in this particular time that was worth worrying about, doing something about. And, you know, hindsight is 20/20. The rear view mirror is a lot clearer than the windshield, which can be a rather foggy thing, can it? So honestly, hand on heart, I can say I'd look at this chart and certainly not see one of the most powerful events in the history of humanity. I mean, what do you see here? And maybe it's a chart that you've studied. You can search this date on Wikipedia and see where this time comes from. And there are many times on that day to have a look at. And of course, you know, were this to be a nativity, and it is, I mean, events are born just as people are, we can apply our great timing techniques of our craft and explore this and explore when some things are going to open up. I mean, what is it that in the year of 2020, this year now, at the solar return of this experience, the moon for the first time will be the same degrees of the same signs, reflecting the sunlight in the same way. Although not necessarily to that place, right? Because here we find 11 p.m., right? The sun at the bottom of the chart, somewhere in the 4th, 5th house, the moon about to rise, right? It's very different, of course, than a 8:46 a.m. time with this waning square moon, well, high in the sky, sometime after sunrise. So of course we can apply our timing techniques, and we should. And we can also look to our space-based techniques. Now the truth is time and space are intimately interwoven, yeah? This is the cross of matter. So, I mean, even our timing techniques, depending on where you lean, right? But if you're looking at transits, for example, we're looking at the time it takes for a planet to circle the zodiac, move through space. progressions, a kind of fractal layaway program of time relating typically in secondary progressions anyway, a day and a year, right? But it's a time thing, and time itself, there's a lot of great points of view around what time is. Is it simply a human construct? I mean, astronomical time, no, right? The Earth spins on her axis day, and the Earth orbits the sun in a year. And there's other measurements of astronomical time as well. And of course, there are measurements of astronomical time, like 19 years, the Metonic Cycle, where Earth, Moon, and Sun align, and similar periodicity, the coincidence, the synchronization of rhythm. So in some ways, time is space. Space is time is a little bit of a harder thing to play, right? A little bit of a stranger song, that one. But space-based techniques, I think, are very powerful in astrology, and that's where we'll go today, right? How can we take a look at an incident and see how it might express on the world stage? And again, much easier to do when the incident is in the rear view, right? Than when it's ahead of us in the windshield, but also worthy of our attention. So the astro mapping techniques and their coincident with worldly happenings has been one of my great recent challenges as an astrological initiate into dancing with the very idea of coincidence and synchronicity itself. Right, I remember clearly when the so-called Great American Eclipse of 2017 in August came around. It was one of the most powerful experiences of my life as a visual astrologer. I watched that eclipse in Idaho. But there were some fires then. There were some floods then. And I remember seeing, I think it was my friend Yulia Simas who showed how we could see on that map some of these places on Earth that seemed to be immediately influenced by that powerful astronomical event. And I think some things in astrology, maybe some of you are past this, maybe you never had this issue anyway. For me, it's an initiation. It's an exercise. There's a lot of me that wants to just like say, no, that's just, coincident. There's no correlation there. That's just, But you look enough, right? And we slowly mute that voice because experience teaches that there are amazing correspondences. So first we'll start here and I'll show you some of the very interesting correspondences of this moment in time on the Astro map. And I'll start here in Astro Gold software, which, like EA Zoom meetings, comes out of Melbourne, Australia. And we'll start here with Astrocartography. And you know what, to make it a little easier to see, let's take some of these asteroids and things off of the chart for now. Actually, you know what? Let's look first and foremost just at the sun. So what is an astrocartography map? And thanks to thanks to EA Zoom meetings for sure for hosting this, but thanks to Astro Gold software. Thank you, Stephanie, for putting the equator and tropics lines on here and the ecliptic line. That's very helpful for my work where I'm very tuned into sharing the astronomy of astrology. And one of the reasons why I love astro mapping techniques is that they are so astronomically based. So one thing that would be nice to show here is the shadow of Earth, right? So first and foremost, many of you will know this already, and I'm sorry if this is a little bit tedious before I get to what you will see as the point, but I want to make sure people understand what we're looking at when we engage with an astrocartography map, which is what this is simply for one planeta, if you will, for the sun. And what an astrocartography map shows us is where a planet is either rising at the ascendant, reaching at the midheaven, resting at the descendant, or rooting down below the ground. That's certainly true for the sun. So this line here, this curved line, and Astro Gold shows this one in bold, this is where the sun was rising in this moment. We can see on the chart that in New York City and Manhattan, the sun had risen some time before this. In fact, if we rewind here a few hours, 2 hours, it looks like we get so that the sunrise line is very close to New York, right? Now, importantly, know that the Earth is spinning from the west to the east. And that's why the sun rises in New York before it does in LA. Yeah? So when we look a couple hours later, this sun rising line is going to be somewhere a couple hours behind New York as the Earth spins, right? So where is that? That's like the Midwest of the United States. So we'll go back to the actual time of this event. And we'll see here that the sun is rising in Colorado, right? So let's actually zoom in a little bit and see that a location where it's close. It looks like Denver. Yeah, so the sun had just risen in Denver and was about to rise in Albuquerque. So what does it look like in an astrology chart when the sun has just risen? So I always love to teach these things and remind, like by starting with what we already know, right? If the sun has just risen, that means the sun is in the 12th house, near the ascendant, on the 12th house side, right? This is the ascendant. This is where the sun, all of the heavens ascend, yeah? So in Denver, we can see in this moment's time, and notice the lines haven't changed, it's the same moment. The sun has already risen. Denver has already spun through that sunrise line. And the general rule with astrocartography lines, which is really good to know, is that if a location is to the right of the line, the planet is going to be angular. Sorry, if a location is to the right or to the east of a line, the planet will be cadent. So when we're talking about ascension, and this is a sun rising line, the cadent house is the 12th. And if a location is to the left or to the west of the line, the planet is angular. And so first house. So if we cast this same moment in time for Albuquerque, New Mexico, the sun is now on the first house side of that line, okay? But regardless, both of these places on the map, and again, same whether I cast this for Denver or for Albuquerque or for Manhattan, same moment of time, these are very strong sun places. This is where the sun is rising in this moment. And so we all have astrocartography maps. In the moment of your birth, the sun was rising somewhere. What is your experience of a sunrise? You can have some experiences in life there, you know, that are similar to that energy. Now, we could say a Virgo sun rises in a different way than an Aries sun rises. You know, you never want to leave your astrology behind when you go play with the space techniques, the mapping techniques. But the important thing to remember, again, if you're left or west of a line, the planet is angular. If you are right or east of a line, the planet is cadent. Okay. So I want you to imagine the shadow of night, right? If we cast this chart for LA, the sun's likely in the second house, and for Hawaii, probably in the third. Right, so well below the ground, hasn't risen yet. It's dark, right? So some of the softwares actually do this, where they'll fill in everywhere between the sunrise line and the sun resting line, sunset, with shadow, right? That's what's happening here. So the Western United States in this moment of time, right, much of Asia, all of Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, right? This is all in the shadow. And in fact, in Christchurch, it looks like New Zealand at this time. This is like the middle of the night because this is where the sun was at the IC. This is where the sun is setting. This is the midday sun over here in Western Africa, right? So that's where the sun is at the midheaven. And on an astrocartography chart, a cool thing to know also is that usually you'll see a circle on the planet's midheaven line, which shows us where the planet was directly overhead. So that's where it's most daytime, right? Noontime. So everywhere between sunrise, noon, and sunset, light, and everywhere between sunrise, midnight, and sunset is shadow. Okay. So it's cool to start this with the sun because that, I think, is something that's easy for us to comprehend. I mean, it'd be much easier to see this on a globe because what you would see is that no matter, any moment's time, half of the earth is in the light and half of the earth is in the shadow. And right, this bell curve between the sunrise and sunset lines, that is half of the earth and the other half is in the shadow. All right. And we can do this for all planets. I think if you'll remember, we were looking at this chart and talking angularity and, button issues. Mercury was rising. Jupiter's near the midheaven. Right? They're both in the cadent houses. Jupiter in the 9th house side. He's already risen or reached his height, midheaven. Mercury in the 12th house side. Mercury's already risen, but just barely doing so in this moment's time, right? And so we see here in New York in this moment, we see Mercury rising and we see Jupiter at the midheaven. Somewhere interestingly, if you remember the events of that day, in this moment of time, somehow Jupiter is bringing our attention to Pennsylvania. And here's Mercury, right, rising. So now this is an interesting thing and a cool thing to know about astrocartography as well. There's a couple of options, not all of the softwares offer them. These are what are called zodiacal lines. No, these are called in mundo lines, okay? You'll see this option up here. If I switch this to zodiacal, you see a really important change, especially in regards to New York City with this Mercury line, right? So let me go back. This is in mundo, and this is zodiacal. And I think I'll actually show that to you astronomically quickly. For me, and it's not necessary to know these things to apply astro mapping techniques, our space-based techniques, but as far as I'm concerned, it's very helpful to have an embodied understanding, and that means astronomical understanding of what these things are and do, to help us open our understanding of the correspondences. So let me go to that time on that fated day. I think it's 8:40:46, but let's go check. Yeah, 8:46:40. That's going to be a big difference. Okay. So looked a lot more like that, right? But Stellarium astronomy software, wonderful software, lets me dim the light some, okay? And take the ground away. And notice that Mercury is here, below ground, right? And yet when we look to the chart, we see Mercury above ground, right? Because of course the horizontal line of our chart wheels of the cross of matter is the horizon. So how is it that here in the astrology software in Astro Gold, I see Mercury above ground, where here in the astronomy software in Stellarium, I see Mercury below ground? Are they just using a different ephemerides? And the answer is no. Because you'll see that this yellow curve, okay, which is the ecliptic plane, that's the plane of the Earth-Sun relationship, right? Earth's orbital plane about the sun, which from our point of view on Earth means the orbital path of the sun in a year. And that's through the 12 constellations of the zodiac and through the 12 signs. And our solar system is relatively flat. So the planets, for the most part, hang out very close to the ecliptic plane. Jupiter's node is in the sign of Cancer. You can see at this time, the nodes of the moon were also in the sign of Cancer. And therefore, this Gemini moon of the time is very close to that lunar node, right? 5 degrees away. And the lunar nodes are where the paths of the moon cross the paths of the sun. So when the moon is near a lunar node, it's on the ecliptic. Here we'll find that Jupiter is very close to Jupiter's, what's called geocentric north node at this time. Teaching for a different class, right? But look at Saturn. Saturn very far, what's called south of the ecliptic plane. Yeah? Because Saturn's nodes, they live in the signs of Cancer, North Node, and Capricorn, South Node. And here we see Saturn in the tropical sign of Gemini, about 15 degrees Gemini, 16 degrees Gemini. And that's pretty far from his nodes anyway. So Saturn's off of the ecliptic plane. Like overteach here. Here's Mercury, right? Mercury's orbital path, pretty unique thing. Mercury and Venus are between the Earth and the Sun, so we just see them going back and forth on either side. The Sun, Venus always stays within 48 degrees is her maximum phase angle, and Mercury within 28. So one interesting thing about this moment in time, right, which isn't like obvious unless we learn about cycles, is that Mercury is very far from the sun, right? This is what, about 33 degrees, or sorry, 23 degrees and change. And that's pretty far from Mercury. So somewhere on Earth, Mercury was visible. It certainly was not here. Not only is Mercury below the ground, but it's daytime. So once Mercury is above the ground, no Mercury for you until the sun sets. So somewhere on Earth in this moment in time, Mercury is visible. The sun's in the 6th house and Mercury's in the 7th. And we can see that on a astrocartography map. I often invite people to relocate based upon planetary visibility. I find it to be a really powerful thing. You know, what if there's somewhere on Earth where your Mercury could be seen? Is that a place where you can find your mind? All right, so back to this thing, and this is just what's called the difference between in mundo and zodiacal, right? So when we say that Mercury, as we do on this chart, lives at 14 degrees and 17 arc minutes of tropical Libra, we are saying that Mercury is here on the ecliptic. We draw perpendicular lines. We project everything to this ecliptic plane. We only show one circle on our astrology charts. We don't show the orbital, circle for every planet. And so most astrocartographers, and certainly Jim Lewis, who in so many ways is like, the one that brought astrocartography into kind of modern consciousness and the dawning of the personal computing, most astrocartographers will use what are called in mundo positions, okay? But you can also, on many of the softwares, do zodiacal. Some of them only zodiacal. And zodiacal would say that Mercury lives somewhere here, where Mercury projects to on the ecliptic plane, where in mundo of the world is concerned with Mercury's actual position. So that degree that Mercury projects to has already risen, and that's what we see on the chart. Rose sometime, 11 arc minutes before. but Mercury actually won't rise in reality here for about 2 minutes after this time. Okay? And we can see that on an astrocartography map, when I select zodiacal positions, I'm looking at the degree that Mercury projects to, right? And you'll see that in that regard, New York City is now to the east, to the right of, and therefore Mercury is in the cadent house, and that's what we see in the chart, Mercury in the 12th. But when I look in Mundo, we see that, oh, Mercury has not risen yet. He's still, in a sense, in the cadent house, which is the first house, which means below ground. Now, that's not true in the chart. We don't show in Mundo in the chart. We show zodiacal. We project to the ecliptic, right? So this is an amazing thing, and it happens all the time, right? So Mercury's degree has risen, but the planet has not. Hopefully that makes sense. It's, I think, a very important thing to know when you're playing with the mapping techniques. Now, let's kind of follow a thread that we were on before. This is where the sun was setting in this moment here in India, in China, in Siberia. Here's where Mercury was setting, okay, in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, it's Mandalay, right? So I could go somewhere in this same moment of time, let's say like Bangladesh, where the sun had set, right? The sun's in the, remember, if I'm on this side of the line, the sun's cadent, so a sun setting line. What's the cadent house? The 6th house. We've already spun through the sunset line into the shadow is Bangladesh, right? Where Pakistan is still in the light. Sun is about to set, but here the sun has set and Mercury has not yet. So let's head over to Bangladesh in the same moment of time in Stellarium software. And by the way, you can go to my YouTube channel, which is More Than Astrology, and find 6 different videos of Stellarium for astrologers training videos if you want to learn how to incorporate this free astronomy software to learn to see your chart in the sky better. It's a really wonderful tool for that. So let's head over to Bangladesh. I'll just go anywhere because all of Bangladesh had this happening. So we see that the sun had set, but Mercury had not yet, right? So the sun's in the 6th house, Mercury's in the 7th house. And if we relocated the chart for this place, we would find that. We would find this Virgo sun in the 6th and this Libra Mercury in the 7th, okay? All right, so let's bring in a few more of these astrocartography lines here. Oops. Let's, I'm going to stop at Pluto and we'll include Chiron in this mix, just so we don't completely flood this chart. And so there's a lot of these amazing lines on Earth. You know, this is where Jupiter was culminating in Pennsylvania. Jim Lewis called that one, well, it's like a line of great opportunity, and typically in visibility and career. Why? Jupiter opportunity, career, the midheaven. Jim Lewis called the sun at the midheaven line the fame line, right? That midday sun and everybody sees you up on high as the light. You get it? Pluto lines tend to be rather interesting, right? So, you know, what might we say about this time in regards to New York, where we find this Cancer Jupiter is angular, right? Not right at the angle as the map confirms. Let's zoom into New York here. Right, and so Jupiter's not in the 10th, right? That's going to be happening for cities like Columbus, Ohio, Pittsburgh, Toledo, Chicago. And the closer you are, the closer Jupiter is to the midheaven. But New York is, again, to the right, to the east, means the planet is cadent. In that case, means Jupiter is in the 9th house, as we see in this chart. And yet, Cancer midheaven, with Jupiter very close. Cancer midheaven, depending on how you pet the cosmic cat, will likely turn your attention to the moon. So we could say part of this moment's purpose, if you will, right? Let's think of this as if this was a human being and they came to sit with us as a client and asking, what's my right livelihood? How should I serve my community? What am I here to do, right? Well, we might go look up at that midheaven and say, oh, you're a nurturer, Cancer. Oh, Jupiter's up there. Oh, it's a spiritual nurture, especially with Jupiter in the ninth house, right? But many of us, and I'm just about to teach a vocational signatures in the chart, right? Much more of a traditional point of view. Let's look at aspects to the midheaven. Let's look at the ruler of the midheaven. So what's up with the moon in Gemini, void of course, in conjunct the midheaven. Traditionally, we talk about an invisibility there, applying to Rahu, opposition with Chiron, in this kind of late third quarter phase. There's a lot. It's different. It's a very different version of Cancer when we look at this Gemini moon, who's also, by the way, in this very powerful place of space that the Lakota people call the sacred hoop of stars. Again, you can watch my Sun on the Cross and the Turning of the Ages video I made for EA Zoom video recently, and that's at GeminiBread.com. So there's something about country, isn't there? Family, right? And if you know some of what happened at this time, especially in this place of New York, there's a lot of flag flying, right? There were commandments like, hey, go shopping. It's your civil duty to keep the economy alive. Don't be afraid, And there was a lot of camaraderie, and I was not in New York City at the time, but I have a lot of friends and clients who were, and really spoke about that, how, you get on the subway and there was this shared fear and also this shared kind of excitement and this feeling of family, if you will. Well, interestingly, the Department of Homeland Security was born out of this. That turn of phrase was used for a different country some time ago when Uranus was last in Taurus. Leave that there. But there's this inconjunct thing. There's something off, maybe. There's something in the invisible places. And one thing we found out much later is that part of the Patriot, think, Cancer, Capricorn there, act, was basically us choosing to give those in control permission to spy on us through our devices to protect us, right? Now, is that what you would see in this chart, right? Would I sit with a client and be like, have you considered being a spy? Actually, the truth is maybe, but probably more like, have you considered giving, speaking for that which can't be seen, speaking for things that exist on the other side? And that's working with traditional aspect theory in conjunction with the archetypes of the signs. And this strength of Mercury, angular Mercury, and Mercury with the midheaven, Mercury with Saturn. Mercury is a very powerful force in this chart. There's also not only that trine to Saturn, but the wedge with Pluto. And a lot of people, when they go to this time, they're looking at the Saturn-Pluto opposition. Of course, we're just in Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That happened in 82 and now in 2020, and in between those times in 2001. Also linked to the synchronicity, the periodicity, the rhythm of the lunar nodes and the eclipse cycles. Right, there was Saturn conjoined Pluto, early 80s, when they actually had the advent of personal computing, interestingly, right? At this time, Patriot Act, and now, right, with Saturn meeting Pluto once again, and this time in the sign of Capricorn, as we all know, significant censorship is going down. I hope you're aware of it. I hope you're at least doing something about it in your own world by being very aware of this problem, right? That is trying to make the internet a not free place. I mean, many countries have experienced this censorship of online information. We've all been actually experiencing it through the places where we usually access the web anyway, right? But now it's becoming kind of official doctrine, if you will. And that means we're ready to like have a look at these things that were previously invisible, and even taking a look, choosing not to turn away, maybe looking for alternate places, right, where we can play and not be censored. It's a very, I think, powerful statement of spiritual sovereignty and the Virgo, purity, virginity, if you will, keeping the information, grounded on earth. Okay. So to look at this map from kind of a geopolitical standpoint, we see some interesting things. Now, again, the rear view mirror is a lot clearer than the windshield. So how interesting to see Neptune here moving through Iran, very close to Tehran. To see, Afghanistan certainly marked here, the Pluto at the midheaven line, Saturn at the IC. Now, of course, those lines are together, right? Why? Because the planets are in opposition. And interestingly, you'll see like the Pluto rising line is here, okay, tying us into London, at least England. And the Saturn line now more through Germany and France. Why are they so far apart? Again, that's like the in-mundo versus zodiacal consideration. Pluto very far from the ecliptic in 2001. Now on the ecliptic. Now Pluto is at Pluto's nodes. So if I look from a zodiacal perspective, you'll see that Pluto rising and Saturn setting line rise close. And that means that this Saturn in the sign of Gemini is setting and Pluto in the sign of Sagittarius is rising, okay? So there's something about Afghanistan, isn't there? And that's, of course, where the war began as a result of this timing. Yeah? I mean, officially the war began in New York, didn't it? Uranus also moving through Afghanistan. And then Neptune through Iran and Iraq. And I think you'll remember that one of the things that was really parroted at this time was this idea of weapons of mass destruction. I mean, Uranus and Aquarius can fit that bill. Interestingly, Venus is opposite Uranus here. They're wedged with Chiron. They're in conjunctus Virgo Sun. Many of you, of course, modern astrologers are going to say, hey, that's Uranus in strength, Aquarius, right? Traditional astrologers might look more towards Saturn, and there's something about this trine and something about this grand trine with Mercury, especially when we look towards the midpoint of this Neptune around 7 degrees and Uranus around 21 degrees, which would be 14, right? Really closer to 15. So you can see that grand air trine, this information exchange, right? And Mercury and Saturn have what's called generosity here. Saturn in the sign of Gemini, which is said to speak the language of Mercury. And Mercury in Libra, where Saturn is said to be exalted. Uranus in strength in Aquarius, right? What does Neptune do about this? And there was a lot of confusion in this time, right? Again, I don't want to project a bunch of bias stuff. I mean, I think that that's something that we can all agree upon. And certainly some confusion about, like, why should this bring us into Iraq and Iran? So it's interesting to see that Aquarius-Neptune line spinning through there, okay? And I could take all day with this. I mean, looking at the different countries who like sent soldiers to these places, for example. I mean, interestingly, Romania was one of like the, it's like UN, US, UK. Romania is like really high on the list of soldiers that joined so-called Operation Freedom. And look at how the Mars line at this time was rising in Romania. And the nodes moving there too. So we're going to look at a very different type of astrolocality map here now. And I realize I'm taking so much time teaching theory that we might not get to as many examples as I would like. But as I do, maybe I'll go a little past the hour. All right, so I'm realizing that I'm no longer in New York, so let me head back there. When we know we're there, because there's Mercury rising, not rising. Right? Is he above ground? Is he below ground? Is she above ground? Is she below ground? You know. Certainly, Mercury's preferred pronoun is they. We're not, no doubt about that one. Anyway, all right. So here's the sun. With really two beings that we could see at this time, right? Could certainly see this moon, this waning half moon. A bit of that curve, right? We're past the squares you saw on the chart. And right here, why is it called the hand of the high man? Well, that's Orion. The moon right on Orion's club, which, by the way, has very deep historical, astronomical alignment with many important dates of the United States. You could look again to that Sun on the Cross, the Turning of the Ages video I made for EA Zoom meetings at GeminiBread.com if you want to explore that more. Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, Washington's death, interestingly. Okay, anyway. So let's say that we were looking at that moon that day. And say, oh, I didn't know you could see the moon by day. So, yeah, right? Or we're looking at the sun, and maybe I'm pointing one of my arms to the moon in the south over there, and one to the sun in the east. Let's do a moon and sun, and I'm feeling that kind of near square in my body, and that's a trip, you know. So what if I turn my shoulders and give my heart to the sun, which has just risen? I would be facing a very specific direction in my local space, right? This is the term that Michael Erlewine used when he kind of dreamed forth this beautiful locational technique in the early 1970s. So here the sun is slightly south of the direction east. And the moon, we gotta look up here, right? The moon's way up there. And yet, I could also draw like a different kind of line, not projecting to the ecliptic, right, which is what we do in our charts, but projecting instead down to the horizon, right? I got to zoom out to do this, but I could say, okay, the moon lives like super high. That's called altitude, right? The moon's altitude at this time is like 65 degrees, like, you know, 2/3 of the way to the zenith above my head, that's 90. But I'm still, if I face the moon, I'm facing southwest, as you can see. It's called azimuth or a compass heading. I'm facing, at this point, we can see in stellarium, the moon's at an azimuth of 230 degrees, okay? South is 180 in the convention, west is 270, southwest is between those two places at 225. So the moon here at 230 is just a little bit west of southwest, okay? So remember, the sun is a tiny bit south of east. The moon is west of southwest. And these are called local space lines, although they are also very global. Okay, so let's zoom in first to New York. And so, and then let me do this thing again just to make it a little easier to see. We'll just look at the sun and the moon. So from New York City, remember the moon was a little bit west of southwest. So that is this direction here. And the sun was a little bit south of east. That's this direction here. Now, an interesting thing is no matter which way you turn, you're facing the opposite point in the globe from where you are. You agree? Okay, that's called the antipode or the antipode. So local space lines, they will always emanate from the place considered, the radix location. And then they will converge. So the moon's going this way, remember, southwest. And the sun's going this way, south of east. And they converge at the antipode, the opposite side of the globe, right there. And they don't stop, right? These interesting curves, and this is true for those astrocartography lines too, they're all great circles. They're all circles that divide the globe in half in one way or another. So literally, if I in this moment of time face the sun, I am facing this direction, which takes me through, looks like Namibia into South Africa, then over to Australia. You know, Australia sent a lot of soldiers here too. Now we see the moon moving through Saudi. Interestingly, the moon, Gemini moon, moving right through London, which somehow isn't written. There we go. Very close, right? Dublin, Brussels, Germany. Notice that it doesn't go to France. And eventually makes its way here to the Middle East, not to Iraq, not to Iran. Actually, sorry, it does go to Iraq, doesn't it? Here's this moon line that's moving right very close to Aleppo and Syria and through Iraq, right? Eventually down through Oman. And importantly, remember, the moon line is actually pointing us in this direction where we said southwest. But it goes all the way around the world and then comes back through these places, okay? Well, so that's interesting because, of course, eventually this moment in time would connect many countries, but led by the United States and the UN, which is headquartered in New York, would lead us to Iraq. But what does that have to do with the Gemini moon? What does that have to do with the third quarter moon? How would the sun direct our attention to South Africa, to Australia? You'll notice I'm not answering those questions. Let me show you the lunar nodes at the time, which of course from Earth's point of view are where the paths of the sun and the moon cross. These are very powerful places of the zodiac, of the heavens. And you'll see that this node line, let me show this to you astronomically. I have to bring the orbits in. And as we said before, the moon at this time was very close to Rahu, to her north node, which is where the moon's path crosses the ecliptic from the south to the north. It's here. So it's pretty close to the moon line, right? It's a little bit further towards the south. So that node line's coming out this way. That's the north node. Or if I could feel its presence down below the ground and I align myself towards the south node, that's going here. And interestingly, as you can see, right to Iran. So even with just sun, moon, and nodes, we see that this moment's time, using this incredible technique of local space astrology, brings our attention to, among many other places, right? Let's be honest, but brings our attention to Iraq and Iran. So I find that to be really interesting. Now we're going to get a little bit more precise with this thing, okay? For one thing, we can bring in a lot more planets. And some asteroids and so-called dwarf planets and centaurs, and we could add and add and add and add. And then we see some interesting energy here because, oh, where's Mars going but to Iraq? Right? So how do we see that in the chart? Well, moon in nodes opposite Mars. So Mars is here in the northeast, in the northern hemisphere, north of the Tropic of Cancer, which certainly New York is. The IC is due north, okay? So this Mars is slightly east of due north. And that is this direction heading up through New Haven, Connecticut, actually. And we'll find in the other direction that Washington, D.C. is aligned on the Mars line. Right? So Washington, D.C., New York, New Haven, where the then standing president was born, W, through London, Tony Blair zone, and into Iraq. So the astrocartography seemed, because we don't see it so much here Afghanistan Ceres is heading there, and so we might want to have a look at what Ceres means in this chart near the node, near the IC, opposite Jupiter. We might bring our attention to the Persephone mythos, right? Ceres, the mother of Proserpina, the Latin for Demeter and Persephone. And we can, really walk that path and find some answers there. But we also saw that in the astrocartography, which is a very different technique, right? Remember astrocartography, where planets are rising, reaching, resting, or rooting. Rising in the east, culminating at the midheaven, resting in the west, or anti-culminating at the IC. And that will tell us a lot about a chart, right? These local space lines, it's not like that. Although importantly, there is one place where they converge. And so, for example, this circle on this Pluto midheaven line, which we saw earlier, runs through Afghanistan, as does the Mars at the IC line. This is the place on the Pluto midheaven line where Pluto was directly overhead. And it's kind of hard to see that here. But this is where the sun was directly overhead. And so the sun local space line will move through the place on Earth where the sun was at the zenith. That's the circle on the sun midheaven line on the astrocartography chart, okay? So basically, anytime you face the sun, you are lending your heart towards the direction of wherever on Earth the sun is directly overhead of the zenith. Anytime you face the moon, you are literally facing someplace around the world where the moon is directly above an observer's head at the zenith, okay? And we start looking at these things and they get overwhelming super quickly, right? I'm going to look at all these lines and actually a lot more, and that's a tale for another time. But I want to show you how you can do this on astro.com, right? Which is just this wonderful free resource, okay? So first of all, many of you, I'm sure, have gone to astro.com. There's free horoscopes, and one is called AstroClick Travel. And AstroClick Travel is an astrocartography map. And you can complete with some delineations. I'll say be careful, right? The sun, we're explaining what the sun means. That should be different when the sun's in Virgo, right on the square to Saturn, which is true at this time. And this is the place on Earth, by the way, where one of the places where Saturn and Sun were in a mundane square because Sun was at the midheaven while Saturn was setting. That's happening up here as well in a different regard. And those are interesting points. It brings us to what's called parans, and that's a tale for another time if you'd like. But this is a really wonderful map. Again, I would say, as with all things computer astrology, be careful what you read. Make sure you bring all of your astrology to the mix. I find astrologers somehow kind of forgetting what they know as they engage with these maps for some reason. So I really like to teach how we can tie the two together because we know the chart so well. That's all the map is the chart in space. That's true for an astrocartography map. For a local space map, it's a different scene. And so Astro.com recently added this where you can do AstroClick local space. It's great. Because I want to show you, and maybe we'll just stop with this one example. Because I think what you're going to see with this one example is that these things really speak. And one thing I love about Astro.com is they're also showing me the azimuths or the headings of the descendant and the ascendant. But so we saw, for example, this Mars line is moving here through the UK and into Iraq, and that the node line is going to Iran, yeah? Well, let me show you a different moment. This is when George W. Bush was born. And George W. Bush was born in New Haven, Connecticut. His dad, like so many CIA cats, went to Yale. Anyway, it seems like it's taking a second for the lines to show. Wait, George Bush has no planets in his chart? I knew it. There we go. Okay, so when Bush was born, if I held him up towards Mars, I'm holding him in this direction and goes all the way around the world and comes back through New York. It comes close to DC, although it's actually Venus and Pluto local space lines that move through Washington, DC. We can also see Bush was the governor of Texas, right? And we see the Saturn line going to the capital city, right? So interesting, right? Saturn would probably represent my political career in some regards. I use the royal my, right? Like, and that's not my plan. But look at the time of Bush's birth. Also, we have this Mars line moving to Iraq, and interestingly, moving to Kuwait, right? Very close to anyway, where his father, of course, started a war. I'm sorry, I should be more careful with my language. Say that however you prefer to hear it. So let's go back to this, the tower moment. To hit go. I'm going to unclick keep azimuth of birth chart, although I'm not going to move this thing far enough for it to matter, right? But I could look at this same moment, for example, from Baghdad. Wait, if I can spell, yeah. And when you do something like this, if you want to play at home, unclick the keep azimuth of birth chart box. I'll tell you why another time. Or I'll tell you why right now. Like, if we relocate this to Baghdad, well, and for some reason my internet's just really slow. This is usually very fast. But these are still showing me the local space lines from New York, as we saw before, Mars and Moon coming to Baghdad and Node going to Iran. But this should show me, it should relocate this to Iraq. Huh. Oh, there we go. Okay. So as Mars was going from New York to Iraq in the local space, that means that if we are in Baghdad, right? So in this same moment, not in New York, but rather in Baghdad, where Mars at the time is here in the southeast. Let me direct our attention there. Okay, so here's Mars, very far from the ecliptic, by the way. Significantly, Mars has a declination of minus 27 degrees, almost like significantly out of bounds. Like, well, let's not take the time to describe that term astronomically, but if you've played with out of bounds planets, you know that's a very kind of rogue Mars. And by the way, that would be just as true in New York or DC or anywhere else in this moment in time as it was in Iraq. The Mars is further south. Actually, let me show this to you. Mars in this moment, culminating at an altitude or zenith in a location on Earth, actually south of the Tropic of Capricorn. That's further south than the sun's yearly travel can bring the sun. That's an image on a map, and this is why having these tropics of Cancer and Capricorn lines in the map are really helpful. Like, I can see visually that Mars is out of bounds. Okay. And that would actually link me into South Africa, into Australia, into Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and that's kind of a conversation for another time, but it's why I will say one of the reasons why things are happening at an accelerated rate in Victoria, Australia right now. If you look at some of the circles of the Capricorn crew from last year when they aligned by parallel, you'll see that they point us to Australia among other places. So there's a lot of ways that we can play with maps and learn about the where very powerful winds might show themselves and see how places are connected. Okay. So again, here we can see that in Baghdad at this moment, the Mars line also moving through the UK and then moving to New York. Like if it goes from New York to Baghdad, then it goes from Baghdad to New York. We're very close to DC, as you can see. All right, so let me go back to the birthplace here. It's going to take us back to Manhattan, and I want to get a little bit more specific. And this is a really amazing gift of this free map at astro.com. Thank you, Astro Dienst, for this. Okay, because here they're kind of showing me probably City Hall in Manhattan. Well, let's bring that to the place where this event that I'm calling the tower occurred, and it's here, Tower 1. Where there's only a footprint left, right? It was this side of that tower. So why get so particular? Because when I do, I will find some very interesting, very local alignments. Like, for example, this node line moving right through the UN's headquarters. And then, see, here's the United Nations. And then off to Iraq. This is the direction, by the way, of, let me show you here, K2, who's a little bit east of north. So especially look at what K2 might suggest in the evolutionary astrology and Vedic astrology paths, and that gets very interesting. So leading from the site of this attack through the UN to Iran. And it just makes me wonder if something here is not completed. Now, I will say, if that was going to go down, I was really thinking last year and hoping not, because the nodes have an 18.6 year cycle of the zodiac. That's their rhythm. The eclipses, which of course are linked to the nodes, 18 years. Saros families, 18.03 years. But the nodes are also what? Sun, moon, and earth. Yeah? So this Metonic cycle of moon return during sun return today, right? Like 2 hours from now, makes me wonder if there is something about this nodal alignment. And we did see things really flare up in Iran last year. And that's not seemingly happen right now, and may that be the truth. Although, you know, interestingly, and the UN is very upset about this, the current standing president of the United States pulled the backing out of like Iran safety checks regarding nuclear plants there, and you can go look into that in the news. Okay, so dig how, as I said before, this Mars line is going right to New Haven, Connecticut, where the then standing President W was born. Okay, what a coincidence. Well, who was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, where we see at this time the Mercury local space line moving towards? And the answer is the then Vice President Cheney, or as I like to call him, Chain Dicky, who was from Birmingham, Alabama, where the Pluto line goes, Condoleezza Rice. What about Rumsfeld, Chicago, right? So that same line that's directing our attention, Mercury was rising, and this is all the way around the world through Omaha and Chicago. By the way, I could go on and on. Rudy Giuliani, who you might know, was very involved in this, and certainly in the spin of this, like literally exactly where the Neptune line goes over here in Brooklyn. It literally passes half a block from the house in which he grew up. Now, if you want to call that coincidence, I appreciate your courage, right? This is an amazing thing. Now, again, what am I going to do about it? I mean, how am I going to look and even see that this moment's coming and oh my gosh, and I understand there was an astrologer who had that experience with this chart. I don't see it personally. I'm not good enough yet. I'll use it, say it that way. But if I could, if I knew this was going to be such a powerful moment in time, maybe I'd have a look and make some predictions. And so that was something I was saying, for example, about the recent solar eclipse in the sacred hoop on solstice, June solstice 2020. And so we could do something like that. I mean, I could look, for example, at the Astrocartography map. Here I'm only showing the midheaven lines. Well, certainly one of the themes of this recent solar eclipse in the sign of Cancer was a near exact conjunction of Jupiter and Pluto. Well, this is how that chart looked in Richmond, California, but if I relocate that to Washington, D.C., and I'm sorry because I know we are an international collective here watching this video and presently in the future, but regardless of where I cast this for, the astrocartography map is going to show me this truth that that chart just showed us, that in this moment's time, Jupiter and Pluto were culminating in New York City and very close to Washington, D.C. Now, if you've played the games of mundane astrology, you know that we'll usually use the capital of a country to speak for the country. And of course, after this time, the Black Lives Matter movement has become so strong globally, yeah? But it started in the United States, right? Well, let's bring in some more of the astrocartography lines. And they're bringing our attention to specific places on Earth. And let me show you some of these local space lines. Now, I could get very close in DC and show you some of the statues that have been toppled. I'm very interested in the truth that the eclipse in that moment was moving very close to Jacksonville, named for Andrew Jackson. You know, I love seeing that the Washington football team is finally changing its name. I'm very interested in the truth when I followed that the eclipse was at the IC in Oklahoma. In some of the native rites, you know, like incredible, like turnaround of like just years and years of treaty betrayal. There's some interesting things happening there, which felt very Martian and eclipsy, and you can look into that. Also, you know, Trump was protested at the Sacred Hoop on Earth, which is the Black Hills of South Dakota, here, where Neptune was rising and where Mars and Neptune were pointing, and that's moving right through Fort Laramie, Wyoming, where so many of these treaties were signed in the mid-19th century. And I was so tuned into the truth of this eclipse itself being in the sacred hoop in the heavens, and the sacred hoop on earth is right here. So again, watch my Sun on the Cross, Turning of the Ages, if you want to hear more about what I feel in regards to this particular eclipse story. And then a comet came through this place. Now look also at how the Neptune local space line in this moment is heading right to Portland, where there's some amazing things happening in this effort at the time. Now, we don't want to remove our astrology from the picture once again. So what is it that Mars and Neptune are together in Pisces? You know, how are they linked to this eclipse? I mean, it's a trine, but we're going to subtract 100 degrees. So there's something about that harmonic, or some, you know, 95 degrees from Mars, and I could go on and on about that. How are they linked into the Jupiter Pluto conjunction of the time? What about this inconjunct with Saturn? But I've been out of time for some time. Let me just show you one last thing on the chart. So we see that this moment, right? Let me cast it again for Richmond. Well, I can't. Anyway, importantly, I could cast this same moment in time for anywhere on Earth, and still our attention in the astrocartography chart is going to bring us to many powerful places on Earth, and look for crossings, okay? So, for example, in this moment's time, we see that this is the Uranus rising line, is crossing the Pluto and Jupiter midheaven lines here on the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Virginia Beach, which is very close to Washington, D.C. And we see it on the chart, right? Uranus at the ascendant with Pluto at the midheaven. Not exact, and there's places, you know, if I could cast it for right here for Virginia Beach, we'd see it's even stronger, but, and this isn't often taught about astrocartography, if it is a system of planetary angularity, and it is, what's the stronger house, the 1st or the 12th? The 10th or the 9th? I'm going to leave it to you to decide, but the tradition suggests the 1st is stronger than the 12th and the 10th more than the 9th. So looking to the west or the left of these lines will show you where they are most empowered. And so the Uranus revolution and Pluto evolution crossing is a pretty interesting thing. And this just happens to be basically Washington, D.C., where we find the revolutionary energy of Taurus rising, while the evolutionary energy expanded by Jupiter, of Pluto culminating simultaneously. And again, trine by sign, but certainly not by degree. So there's something about this 105 degrees between Uranus and Pluto at this time that I would go explore. And one way we can do that is play the math game, and you'll see that this one aligns close to, oops, a 72-degree thing. Oops, sorry, no, we lost, that's wrong, it should be 7. 7-degree thing, or a 7th harmonic, a septile. So this is a biseptile, or it's a biseptile alignment, which itself is like very Uranian. So let's play with harmonics another time. I'd love to show you some other events, by the way, like I'll do this for my own chart, of course. I have my local space planets set up in my home. Yesterday, my partner's child had this surgery, literally as Mars was stationing retrograde. I'm interested in the Mars retrograde moment. And I bring that marker to my home and see that it's pointing to the hospital where he was having the surgery, and that's where my attention was. From his birthplace, right? Actually, from his birthplace, Mars was pointing to the hospital. From our place, the nodes were pointing to the hospital. So I hope you'll bring this. I hope I showed enough in this example to like interest you if you weren't interested already. I hope some of the transmissions about the astronomical backing of the thing weren't boring, but rather helpful to add some understanding for you. And I hope you'll start playing around. Eventually, I'll have Astrolocality courses. In fact, I will be teaching Astrolocality for the Organization for Professional Astrology at their next retreat, quote fingers in the air, because it will be virtual, and that's in April of 2021. And yeah, if you dig my style and you want to see more of a classical offering, I will, for Washington State Astrological Association next month in October 2020, be offering teaching on turning the wheel, and especially using turning the wheel techniques and so-called derived houses techniques with the wonderful predictive Hellenistic technique of annual profections. That's on October 8th. And then on October 10th, a workshop for vocational signatures in the chart, right? So that highlight question always is so big right now. You know, my job just ended. What am I meant to do? Or whatever it may be. So it's going to be a fun workshop. So you can go to WSAA. Just look for WSAA Astrology online. That will direct you to Washington State Astrological Association. You can sign up for that presentation and workshop. I would love to have you there. I love being here. Thanks again to the EA Zoom meetings. Exclamation point, and there's a good reason for that exclamation point, because it's such an exciting thing to have so many different astrological presenters tuning into this amazing cosmic craft that has called us all for a reason. So thanks again for joining me here. It's nice to see you or meet you. I hope we can engage sometime live on Earth. You can find me at GeminiBrett.com. And that's it for me today. I will see you in space.
Thank you, Gemini. That was fantastic. Would everyone please unmute and thank Gemini Brett?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thanks
Thank you
for,
so much.
all right. Thanks for what you do for our community. It is a big deal and it's a joy to be included. Thank you very much. See you again.